Hello, and welcome to Come Play With Us, a spooky storytelling podcast. My name is Leela, and I'm joined by my evil twin,
Ruby. We're actually both the evil twin. We're both writers with non-writer day jobs. We believe in the power of great storytelling, so we've invited guests with the challenge of weaving a tale about real-life hauntings and paranormal activities with the sole purpose of scaring the shit out of us.
We'll rate them to see how they've done. Our ratings go a little something like this: scared shitless, some chills, and I think I'll be able to sleep tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this very special episode. It's a little different than what we've done before. Usually we have our friends come on and tell us a scary story and try to scare the shit out of us. But we thought, what if we put ourselves to the test and we were in the hot seat and we were the ones tasked with scaring our friends? Because we have to know what it feels like too, and we have to understand the craft that goes into, telling a story that's designed to elicit an emotion and fear. Okay, so we are joined here with Samaya, who she's our friend and she will be the judge today. And
Welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
doesn't it feel nice this time? Like you're like, I don't have to do any work. I just sit here and I get to listen to a story.
Yeah, I'm
And I get to
excited
rate it.
to be the one
Payback.
that will be scared.
Yeah.
Because I get scared. I wouldn't say easily, but I'm excited to be scared.
This is a haunted site that Leela and I have both visited.
Oh,
Leela has visited
interesting.
twice and I've visited once, and we have both conducted paranormal experiments in this
Wow.
location. I am talking about, of course, the Morris Jumel Mansion. It was a cold, rainy night in October. We headed up to the Morris Jumel Mansion. And as I mentioned, it is known to be one of the most haunted houses in New York City, aside from the Merchant House Museum, which I told you about already. It's not only one of the most famous old houses in New York City, it is the oldest existing house in New York City. And with all the changes that you see that happen in our city, a lot of historic places are torn down, condos are put up. It's remarkable that it still exists. As I mentioned, it is in the Washington Heights neighborhood in Manhattan. It sits on top of a hill. What's significant is that back before there were all these buildings here in Manhattan, before it was as crowded and populated as it is now, when it was built in 1765, there was basically like nothing else around. It was like farmland or country homes, of the rich and famous. So you could see like basically everything from there. It was like, and if you were in Manhattan, like you could see it. Like it was, or what was Manhattan back then. So you could say it's kind of like our city's oldest resident that's continued to keep watch over the city and all of its many changes, whether it likes it or not. I think that you would like this, Sumaya, because of your architectural background, but the house is designed in the Federal, Palladian, and Georgian styles.
Okay.
Try to look that up. Don't know what that means. All I know is that there's 4 big ass columns in the front, and that is kind of what is the, what these styles kind of have. It has a basement, 2 stories, and an attic, and we saw all of this on our tour.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So, it's like when we got there, I said we took the C train, and then it's just a short walk over to Sylvan Terrace. And the terrace is actually what used to be a carriage driveway. and that was added later on. It wasn't added back when it was in 1765. So when you step onto this terrace, it's kind of it's weird because, like I said, you forget that you're in Manhattan because you got this old cobbled carriage driveway. You got this big mansion looming right in front of it, and on either side you have these 1800s row houses. So it's kind of like it's like I watched the Holzer Files because they went to the Morris Jumel Mansion, and someone had mentioned that there's just layers of time, you know, and that's how you feel, and you really are sort of transported, and you forget where you are.
Yeah,
And
it
so
doesn't feel like New York City.
no, so the only thing to do is to proceed down the carriage driveway to the gates. It was nighttime. It was raining. And the rain's kind of pitter-pattering on the cobblestones, the rain sliding down beneath the stones, and yeah, it was just a moment to sort of pause, but we weren't pausing because we were late, as usual. So we were rushing. We weren't able to just kind of stand there enough.
No,
and
not as
enjoy.
usual. I had predicted what time we needed to leave, but then Ruby, we go eat pizza. Ruby doesn't finish it, so then she wants to go back to my place and put it in the fridge.
Uh-huh.
So by all
I
means,
never finished my food.
we would have gotten there on time.
I never finished my food. But how about I start with a little bit of the history, because I know you were interested, Sumaya, in knowing more about it.
That'll
So
paint a
yeah,
picture.
let's paint a picture, and then we'll go to all the fun stuff. So the mansion was built in 1765, as I mentioned, by a retired British military officer named Roger Morris. So that's where we get the first part of Morris Jumel. I just want to note that this land was formerly the home of the Lenape people, who lived in what is now Manhattan, and who gave Manhattan its name, Mannahatta. And like all of Manhattan was their home, even so far down to where I live in the East Village.
Oh, wow.
Is
that like an indigenous tribe?
Yeah, it was a Native American tribe of the Lenape people. So the Lenape people, this area of where the Morris Jumel Mansion is, it belonged to them. And so when the Dutch came in, the land was essentially taken from the Lenape. The Dutch, basically, their side of the story was, oh, well, we sold you the land. And the Lenape people were like, well, no, we didn't understand that a sale had happened. We thought we were coming into an agreement that we were going to share this land equally. So, there was a little bit of duplicity going on there. And so eventually it turned into, parcels of land and lots of land that then, when the British came in, was sold to various British people, until eventually Roger Morris bought it. And then he had the mansion built. It became his country estate. And it should be noted that it is very likely that the home was built and the estate was cultivated by enslaved peoples and the indigenous. So, I just wanted to put that out there, because we have to remind ourselves that a lot of these haunted places, I always say that with hauntings, there is a lot of pain that comes from, like, that creates
the energy,
right? Or a lot of pain is associated, or sadness is associated with the site of a haunting. And I've said this in previous episodes, but wanted to definitely note it here.
Yeah.
What is not likely, but very much known, is that Roger Morris and his wife, Mary Phillips Morris, she had already come from a wealthy family. They were slaveholders themselves. So there were slaves that lived and worked in that estate. So a lot of the very rich people had these country homes. It was weird for me to find out that, I forgot who it was, I don't know, George Washington or some dude, who had a country home where the Times Square area is. And I'm like, what? That's like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That's like 10 minutes from where I live. And it's because back then everything was like, Manhattan was all concentrated in where the lower Manhattan area is now, where we'd see, the financial district, the Seaport area, Battery Park, like all that was Manhattan back then. So then you would go and you'd have your country homes in the Times Square area or in Harlem,
like in the country.
That was their country because
Wow.
it was nothing then in the late
Yeah.
1700s. And imagine like, taking like your carriage up there. It probably took like a couple days to get there. So you really feel like you're traveling really far and you're actually not. Yeah, the Revolutionary War broke out in 1765. They were in there for about 10 years and they were loyalists. So they fled through England. And George Washington was like, oh, don't mind if I do. And so he saw this house had very strategic placement. He could see everywhere. He could see where the British soldiers were advancing, things like that. And so he just basically just moved in. They were only there for a month. And then they were forced to retreat even further north. So the British were like, well, now we don't mind if we do. We'll have what you're having. And so then they moved in. This is where the British and the Hessian generals and various staff that also likely included enslaved people were staying.
What are Hessians?
They were these like German.
They were these like German mercenary soldiers that were like,
oh my God.
that the British had basically come in, I can't say flown in, shipped in, and they just were like merciless. Just merciless.
God.
But as we know, eventually the British lost the war and they withdrew from New York. When that was all said and done, any property that had belonged to any former loyalists was confiscated. So the Morris Jumel Mansion was confiscated basically by the city of New York. And then it was put up for sale. And no one knew what to do with it. So it briefly was a tavern. And it just kept changing hands. No one really lasted that long with this house. And then eventually, Roger Morris died in 1794, and Mary Morris tried to get the house back, and they're like, nope, fat chance, loyalists, get the hell out of here. So the estate, as it used to be, it was split up, so into various lots of land, but the house itself and some of the grounds still kind of, got to be retained as one lot. And it was bought by a wealthy French wine merchant by the name of Stephen Jumel in 1810. So that's where he gets the other half of his name. So you get the first half from Roger Morris, and you get the second half from Stephen Jumel.
Yeah.
So here's where the story gets more interesting, because Stephen Jumel was married to Eliza Bowen Jumel. She brought along their adopted daughter, who was actually her illegitimate step niece.
Oh.
That's where the drama does not end, because Eliza Jumel was a very interesting character. During that time, she was known to be an interesting character, and even now, retrospectively, she's known as one. So she was originally born a bastard into poverty. Her mother was an indentured servant, and her father was a sailor. Go figure. So as a child, she bounced between either living in brothels with her mother, who may or may not have been a prostitute, to being sent to live in a workhouse with her sister because her mother couldn't afford her upkeep. Eventually, she became an indentured servant herself when she was old enough to be one. Her father died and her mother remarried, moving the family all over New England and the East Coast. But eventually, her mother and her stepfather died of yellow fever. And at this point, she was in her early 20s. So around the age of around 23, she moved to New York City and she changed her name to Eliza Brown to kind of distance herself from her past. And so, like any other young woman who moves out to New York City, her day job was servant, but her dream job was to be an actress. And so she was actively pursuing it. It's been speculated that she was also a prostitute, but I kind of feel like that might be, it hasn't been proven. And I also think that might just be from contemporary bitchy sources because people were just kind of bitchy about her, very judgy of her. And also there's been a later sort of misogynistic treatment of her. She was, look, let's just hand it to her, right? She came from humble beginnings. She was strategic in how she got wealthy. How was she strategic? Well, she met her meal ticket with Stephen Jumel. And they dated, whatever was considered dating for early 1800s, and she became mysteriously ill and said, I want to get married. Like, I want to make me an honest woman and marry me. I'm sick. Marry me before I die. And he's like, oh shit, okay. They get married on her deathbed, and then all of a sudden the next day she wakes up and she's like, oh my God, wow, I'm cured. All right, so we're married now, right?
Your love cured me.
Yeah, your love in quotation marks.
Your money.
Money. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but her reputation just was not the strongest, just because of her beginnings. And she was desperate to boost her social standing. So it's believed that Stephen Jamel bought her this house to kind of be like, see, look what we have, and kind of help her out, because that for some reason was like just wanting to belong with the New York high society was so important to her, just to be accepted by them. And despite her reputation back then and now, I want to note that she did have servants in her home, but she employed formerly enslaved persons rather than slaves. So yeah, she had a mixture of servants, but she did not have any slaves. And I think that
which is
already which was weird for back then. So that's
progressive
already
for that time. Yeah.
Yeah. And remember of her humble beginnings as an indentured servant and her mother being one. So that already tells you a lot about her character, and who knows, maybe that's why high society was like, oh, look at her, who knows.
These libtards.
This Leela just comes in.
She had to say it.
Yeah. So, and so the house already had this history because of George Washington. Like I said, it was a very visible landmark. So they were like, okay, this will kind of help her out. And so they split their time between, their apartment in New York, this country house, and then France. And they would, because Stephen Jamel was French, so they would just kind of bounce around. But even back then, it was rumored to be haunted by a Hessian soldier who was often seen on the steps. And her adopted daughter / illegitimate step-niece refused to be alone in the house because she was terrified of this Hessian soldier. Anyway, after some time, Stephen Jamel, he falls through some financial hardship, and he tries several times to sell the place, and he's unsuccessful. So he deeds the entire house and the surrounding estate to Eliza Jamel. And everyone's like, oh, why? She tricked him into giving her his entire estate. But actually, no, it's because she was really good with money. And regardless of all his bad moves and his extreme debt, she was actually smart in how she managed their estate and her investments. So it was more like, here, you figure out what to do with this, Eliza, but also as a way for him to get his name off of it and escape his creditors. So it was more strategic than she's this trifling lady. Also, another thing I think that has kind of, unfortunately, with her reputation kind of, continued to this day, is that unlike other women of the time where they were supposed to be kind of demure and gentle or whatever, she was like very outspoken. And so when her husband had business associates who, squandered, his wealth and mismanaged it, she would tell them off and be like, you're gonna figure this out. Yeah. So, her reputation back then, it was something that now I think we would really praise. It was looked down upon back then. So anyway, Stephen Jamel dies. And that's not the end of Eliza's story, of course, because she stayed in that house. And she's a survivor. So what did she do? 14 months later, she is married to Aaron Burr, the former vice president of the United States.
Wow.
And a major character in the musical Hamilton that, people also know him as. He was 76 years old and she was 58. Before you think she's another gold digger, actually, this was more because, again, she wanted to find respectable standing in New York society. That was like her white whale. It was so elusive and she's trying so hard to fit in. So she married him just because of his history, of course. But also, he was pretty trifling himself. He married her for her wealth. He was financially broke. So, Aaron Burr, who we already know is trifling, was like enjoying her money. And she was like, look, let me get something out of it. So whenever she would go and she'd travel to France, she'd refer to herself as the vice queen of the United States. I mean, I love it. I love it. I was like, get it. I think that was a moment where I said to Leela, oh my God, I'm obsessed with
She's my hero.
Yeah. So, of course, Aaron Burr, being the trifling hoe that he is, he moves into the house, of course, but he just burns through Eliza's money. And she's like, heck no. And so she separates from him after only being married to him for 4 months. Their divorce was finalized on
He
his
died
deathbed.
of old.
He died of old. So Aaron Burr died of old, and she basically was like, it's not like people are like, oh my God, she's so rough that she would file for divorce. Like but it's like, it's not up to her to finalize a divorce. It was just perfectly finalized, like on his deathbed.
It happened to be.
So
Got it.
it's just really symbolic. So anyway, after that, she didn't marry again. She just she traveled, and she partied. But as she got a little bit older, it's very likely she had dementia. And so she kind of became, it's really sad because she tried so hard to fit in before, but now she kind of became like a ridiculed figure, an eccentric figure. And she actually died at the age of 90. She lived, to a pretty old age for back then.
Yeah.
So, the rest of the history of the house is that it went through decades of disputes over who's the rightful heir, kept changing hands. People who lived there, there was a family that moved in 1894. They changed everything about it. They sealed stairs, installed new wallpaper, replaced a lot of Eliza's hard work, because she went in and she decorated the entire, like, when she went into the house, it was decorated entirely to her taste, And so she just was a patron of the arts and had all these paintings and everything that she had put up. So, how do you think Eliza would feel knowing that all this stuff happened to her house? I mean, she was pissed. So, as time went on and as we get closer to the 1900s, people are like, look, we need to turn this mansion and the surrounding areas into like a museum and historical site. So the owners at that time, they ended up selling it to the city, and it was restored. So now when you go in, it's sort of restored to reflect the architecture and styles of when it was first built and the work that Eliza had put into it.
Oh, okay.
So now to the fun part. The hauntings and our own experiences in the Morris Jumel Mansion. We made our way to the front of the house. There's these 6 steps up to this grand door, and you enter in, and you're in this large foyer with like this like nice little like gold-looking sort of fixture above you. And when you walk into the large foyer, to the left is a large portrait of Eliza. This is a story that happened in the 1960s. There was a lot of interest in this house in the 1960s, and I'll get back to that. But there were a bunch of school children that had come to visit this house in the 60s for a tour. And they were, waiting on the front lawn. They're all being loud and boisterous, being kids. And a woman came out on the balcony. And she said, my husband is very ill. You have to keep quiet. Essentially, she was like, shut the hell up. And then she went back inside.
I mean, some stories have her use like more colorful language than that, but basically
some stories,
that's the gist. That cussing them out. Yeah.
Wow.
Depends on the storyteller.
Yeah. And so after she disappeared, the curator came out a few minutes later, and the kids were like, oh, there was this woman that came out and she yelled at us. And he was like, no, there's no one in the house but me. And so when they went inside and they saw that portrait, they screamed and they pointed and they said, that's her. That was the woman that yelled at us.
She's been dead for 100 years.
Yeah, and then they said she's been dead for like
I guess 80 years or whatever that. Or
the story differs though, because people say that they also used to have like a red-haired mannequin in the foyer, and that's what the kids pointed at and said that was who it was. But regardless, it was Eliza who the children had met. So beyond this foyer where this painting is, there's a large hall, and then there's this octagonal room. And it's called the octagonal room because it's kind of shaped like an octagon. So the windows are kind of set into these sort of facets. And there's a large fireplace, beautiful chandelier, and this red carpet. And so for our tour, there were all these chairs that were set aside in like a semicircle. And each chair had an EMF recorder or an EMF device on it. And we were told, how to use it. Basically, if it was green, there was no activity. If it started to sort of beep red, there was some activity. They'd also set up these cat balls, which are these little balls that if it detects motion, it starts to light up. I don't remember if my EMF reader picked up anything, but I will say
it's a very creaky home.
Yeah, and so one of the main hosts of the Holzer Files, and he said that in his first night in the Morris Jumel Mansion, he felt unwelcome. I will say I actually felt so comfortable. I felt
it was cozy in there. The heat was on. The radiators were clanking.
Yeah, it was warm.
I went to use the bathroom. It was clean. I felt really welcome.
Honestly, and I felt that way too. And I will say it was almost like a gracious host had welcomed us into her home. And that's how I felt. And these guys probably didn't feel that way because they kept talking shit about Eliza. We had a history lesson, nothing happened for us in the octagon room like it did for the people in the Holzer Files. So we went and we kind of split up into groups, and they took us first into the parlor, which is when you first enter. It's on the left. Here, I remember a cat ball did go off. No one had been near it or touched it. It went off, and the guy that we were with, I think she was also a medium. And she was like, well, welcome. Here it is. Welcome, spirits. And so I was like, okay. The parlor was, the lights were all off. The parlor was a bit dark, so I couldn't really see it, but it's basically like a tea parlor. So you can imagine maybe there were still some tea parties being had in there. Maybe got a little too fun and bumped a little cat ball, who knows? So, yeah. So, and the cat ball, when it goes off, it's just all these like flashing lights. It just lights up the whole room, like a disco ball almost. So we were like, okay, we're off to a good start.
Well, apparently also the spirits, like, if you want to talk to them and ask yes and no questions, the spirit will tap the cat ball to answer, because it can only be it only really turns on with like touch. Yeah, so because I thought it was motion sensor, so I was like, I kept waving my hand in front of it and nothing was happening. So it has to be a touch. It has to be touched, pretty much.
So very deliberate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then after this, they took us to another room on this ground floor, and it was the library. And I don't remember much happening in there. The library was set up more like a sitting room, and I don't remember much happening there. But like I said, it was so warm and comfortable. And this brings me back to the Holzer Files, where they said that they felt unwelcome. And honestly, like, I had to actually turn that off towards the end, because towards the end they go and they decide to hold a seance because the spirits are very violent with them. And they decided, and I turned it off, and I was like, I've seen enough. Because basically, I think that, like, if you go into a place and you experience hauntings, or you know that it's haunted, your brain wants to create a narrative. And the narrative that they had decided to create was, like, one of the people who they interviewed in the Holzer Files was like, yeah, they practice Santeria out there, and there's all this like witchcraft and stuff. And then even the medium who came on the show, she was like, I feel like there's been a lot of spells and spell work. So I was like, I turned it off because I'm like, before you guys start saying that some of the slaves were doing this, like, I'm just done, that's what my consensus is, that they wanted to believe that there were malevolent spirits there, and they wanted to believe that Eliza herself was malevolent. And you know what? If she was, it's because you guys walked up in there and disrespected her, So that's kind of
these feminazis, these
feminists. Yeah. So
interesting. Okay.
We went into the dining room next. It's also on the main floor, and this is where things got a little bit more fun. The guide, they kept bouncing us between like a medium and a regular tour guide. So this was a regular tour guide. He had dowsing rods. Do you know what dowsing rods are?
No.
Dowsing rods are these rods that you hold in your hands, and they point straight out. They don't point straight up. They point straight out.
They're like at an angle, like that.
Okay.
I'm just gesturing to you. There you go.
So when you hold them, the sticks kind of point out, right? So if you ask a spirit, where are you? The dowsing rods can move and point to where they are. Also, if you ask it a yes or no question, if the answer is no, the dowsing rods stay still. If the answer is yes, they cross. So the guide, he had these dowsing rods, and he said, does anyone want to use them? And people were kind of like, but me, because I'm like, hell yeah, give me my spirits. I said yes.
And we've used them before too, like in another ghost tour.
Yeah. So he handed me and the rods, and I asked this, I said, is there a spirit here present in the room? And the dowsing rods crossed, which means there was. And I said, if there is a spirit here, where are you? And the dowsing rods, they turned together, and they kept turning and turning to the point where they bumped against my shoulder. And I looked behind me, and there was a chair.
Ooh.
So the dowsing rods pointed to a chair behind me, and everyone started to giggle nervously. And I said,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, there's a spirit right behind me. This is amazing." So I was like, "Wow, this is fun." It got a lot more fun than that. So up here we have the room that's known as Aaron Burr's room, but it's basically like probably where her first husband slept as well. Back then they would sleep in different rooms. So it's kind of known as Aaron Burr's room. We went in, and there's a 4-poster bed and a chair. Apparently, Lin-Manuel Miranda has been to this house and sat in that chair while he wrote 2 songs in Hamilton. And we were now back with the guide, who's a medium, and she said, you know, there are times when you can smell cigar smoke when you're in here. Can you guys smell it? And we smelled it. It actually did smell like cigar smoke, but no one smokes there. So that made us believe that Aaron Burr's spirit is still present in the room in which he died. We went into the next room. It's like you know, you walk a little, you know, on the northwest side of this landing is another room, and this is where, as Leela mentioned, she had Eliza Jumel. I believe it was a nephew, and that was his room. You know, I think her niece was stayed in that room. People stayed in that room at various times. So that was his room. Leela actually has experienced something with this room. Leela, do you want to tell us?
So when I went on a tour, like just a regular candlelight tour, it was more like historical and less ghosty. But they did talk about how the young man who stayed in that room was like just a bit of a creep, and that a lot of women would encounter like someone like touching their hair, or like something, or an entity like, you know, like ruffling their sleeve or something like that. And that like a lot of women tend to feel uncomfortable in that room. We had kind of like peeked into the room or whatever, and then they just kind of let us mill around the landing. And I was like, you know what, let me go take another look at that room. And I was on my own, and I was walking up towards the room, and there was no one in front of me, like no one in that room. And then I just heard this noise in my right ear, just this like, whoo, like this grunt. And it was so close that it's like you can nearly like feel the breath in your ear. You know, if someone talks in your ear very close to your ear, it's like you feel that, you know, just that the bubble of air.
Yeah.
And I thought it was Jacqueline, because I was on this tour with Jacqueline, and that's something she would do, like come up and try to scare me.
Yeah.
And I turned around, there was no one behind me. And I really felt like someone was playing a prank on me. And I was kind of like, you know what, screw you, I'm going to go into this room. So I went in and I just like looked around and nothing happened. But I could still feel that, like, you know, it was such a physical thing.
Yeah.
Well,
or someone just went like, who, in my ear.
When we went in there, actually, it was cold. I remember it was actually pretty cold in there, even though the heat was on. All of our EMF readers went off. Now, this is just another plain room, 4-poster bed. There's like a desk in the corner.
Okay.
Like a writing desk. And for some reason, all of our EMF readers were blinking red at this desk. I'm only assuming there was a spirit sitting at that desk the entire time.
Yeah,
maybe watching us.
Yeah, it was the desk that was getting all the attention.
Okay, so the next room was Eliza's room. And this room, apparently, according to Eliza Jumel, her bed was, I think it was Napoleon's bed, or one part of Napoleon's furniture, she claimed. So we went in, and it's just got this like bed, almost like a day bed. And we all sat on the ground, and, you know, we heard a little bit more about Eliza. And we were now with the medium. And she, of course, in the Holzer Files, they said their medium had heard someone scream at her and say to her, "Don't go into my room. Don't go into my room." Yeah. And she told them, "Don't go in her room." But that didn't happen to our medium. Instead, she asked her with the dowsing rods, "Eliza, do you like the carpet?" And Eliza didn't answer, but it was famously assumed that she did not like that they had put in a new carpet. So she said, "Does anyone else want to talk to Eliza?" And I said, "I want to talk to Eliza because I'm obsessed." So she handed me the dowsing rods, and I asked, "Eliza, are you here in the room with us right now?" And the dowsing rods crossed. which means she was. And I said, Eliza, if you are here, where are you? And the dowsing rods, they turned and they stopped and they were pointing at her bed.
Oh.
And I was like, the same bed where she presumably died. So I was like, all right, Eliza and I, we're clearly creating a connection here. And that's actually what the medium was saying too. And she's like, you're very sensitive to the spirits in this house. I'm like, I like this a lot. So after this, we went up to the attic. The attic stairs are famous because this is where many people have seen the Hessian soldier, the one that was seen as early as 1810. It is believed that he had tripped and fallen on his own bayonet and died. But I watched Ghost Adventures, and in that there was an employee who said that she's seen someone's boots coming down the stairs, and she believes it's the Hessian soldier. So we heard about the Hessian soldier and his sightings in the attic. I don't remember much else, but I know that in Ghost Adventures, one of the people there, he kept getting nauseous, and our guide, who was a medium, she said she often gets nauseous in this place, and she believes that happens when a spirit is present. But of course, none of us did at that time. So after this, we went downstairs. We went down to the gift shop, and the medium came up to me and she said, "Can you come with me for a minute?" And she kind of took me away from everyone, and she took me back upstairs. It was just us two. And she took me into the cold room where the pervert slept. And she handed me the dowsing rods, and she's like, okay, I think something's going to happen if you start talking to the spirit. And I said, okay. And there's a video, and I'm going to text it to you. But there's a video. She started to take a video, and I said, she gave me dowsing rods, and she said, go. And I said, okay. Is there a spirit present in this room? And it crossed. And I said, yes. And then I said, is it the spirit of, and I forget his name right now, when I send you the video, and we're going to put this up on our site, I asked if it was him, and it crossed to yes. And I said, okay, well, if you are in this room, where are you? And the dowsing rods turned, and they stopped at the writing desk, where we had all picked up a spirit with our EMF readers. And I said, I'm done. I'm out of here. I had chills. I was shaking, and I basically just ran down those stairs. I wanted to add she herself apparently is very sensitive, because we had spent some time in the basement at the end of the tour, and all of our readers would go off red at various times. And she had said that she'd recorded a lot of voices there. Apparently, it's one of the most haunted places.
The kitchen is in the basement.
Yeah, and in the Holzer Files, one of the tour guides, he was recording voices there. There was a light flickering in there. The lights are known to flicker. We just didn't see them because the lights were all off. But our guide, the medium, she's experienced them flickering. So we tried to talk to the spirits and capture a voice, and we didn't. And they asked us what we felt about the tour, and I said, I said, I feel like I really got to know Eliza, but I said, I wish I could see her. And I said, I wish she would just come into this room from that dark hallway right behind us. And everyone was like, no, we don't want that. But I said, yeah. And so I think I kind of spooked some people, but that was my experience our experience in the Morris Jumel Mansion.
Yeah. Do you want any thoughts now, or you want me to watch the video first?
Yeah, watch the video.
Okay.
So the first question got cut off. So when I first asked, is there a spirit here, that got cut off. She only started recording after the spirit announced itself to me. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that video is it's captivating. It's like the darkness in the room, and actually seeing the rods. I already forgot what they're called.
Dowsing rods.
The dowsing rods. Thank you. I'm like, oh my god, they really are moving. That was chilling.
So yeah, the first question I asked in that video was, is there a spirit here? But we didn't catch that. But that's when the dowsing rods had crossed. So you kind of saw how they move. And then when it turned, and so my second question was, yeah, like, if there is, where are you? And it turned to that writing table.
Okay, so the rating is, I think I'll be able to sleep tonight.
That's the lowest, right?
That's the lowest, yeah. And I'll insert the sound. And then the medium is some chills. And then the scariest is scared
Scared
shitless.
shitless. Okay, so there's only 3? For some reason I thought there was 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Too many sound effects.
Originally, we were going to do 5, but then it was like, that's going to be too much. So
Yeah, you don't get like any nuances in between, but
yeah, sorry. There's no nuance here, Samaya.
okay. So can I like talk through and then tell you my my thing at the end?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that I really loved was the thorough explanation of history, all the things leading up to it, and then what really helped me like put my shoes in this situation and get creeped out was that you guys had actually done the tour. Like this was an experience that you could talk me through, that you've been through, and that's special, right? Like that's not like what you get normally. In the beginning, that description of just the house elevated like on a hill or on a mountain, you know, essentially, and the view, I immediately was able to call to like that scenario in books or media that I've read or seen before. So like the first thing I thought of was The Nightmare Before Christmas. Isn't his house like up on a hill or something like that? And he has the fence around. So that was like the first thing in my mind.
It's like the poster.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it was that visual I got from you guys telling me when you were walking up, right? It was rainy and dark, and the carriage way, I think what you called it, right? Going up. So that was like the first really kind of visual I got in my head that set the whole scenario. So that's what I was thinking of the whole time, like this creepy haunted house and the individuals in it that probably just wanted to be left alone or something. The second thing I think that like added to the creepy, scary factor was the transient nature of the house. Like it just had so much history, and especially the beginning history felt like, because no one stayed in this house for so long, there had to be something up with it, you know? Like it just didn't become a home for anyone, but there were so many
When you go inside, it's a beautiful home when you go inside. And so you're surprised. You're like, why? You know, there's so much that you can do with it. Why? I mean, it's an incredible house.
Right. So that's like even further why it becomes suspicious, right? Because it should be a place where it's passed down through generations, where people have enjoyed it. But just these like historical accounts of wars, the mercenaries, the indigenous people, the slaves, the just all of these figures that probably crossed through these doors, and then finally getting to Eliza and her family. I was really able to, I think this is part of like tailoring the story to your audience, right? I was able to put myself in her shoes because she's a woman who's trying to make something of herself. So that really allowed me to like think through it and get properly, I think, scared. And then obviously at the end, just you talking me through walking through each room, like that octagon room. I think I just watched the scary movie. Well, more of a campy movie, campy scary movie, Drag Me to Hell. You guys seen that?
Oh, it's kind of an older movie.
It is, yeah. Ben wanted me to watch it. It's a little more campy, but there were like 2 jump scares. Anyway, they have a room just like that, right? Where they're calling to spirits. It's more of an octagon. It's setting the scene. So I really had all these visuals to pull from. But the kicker is just the video you sent me. I mean, it's dark, it's gloomy. I could see the rods, so everything you had explained to me. And then just when the video pans to the desk at the end, I was like, all right, I'm creeped out.
And you know, I went back and I watched that, and I had turned the volume up because I wanted to hear, because you know they said you can sometimes hear. And when I first watched it that night, I heard a yes when I asked it, is this the ghost of William Chase? I heard a yes. And when I say I had a hard time sleeping that night, I was like tossing, like I was like, oh my God, like have I made contact with the spirit? Is it gonna follow me home? Like, is it in Leela? Because I was over at Leela's. Is it in Leela's apartment now? But it's funny because when I go back and I listen to it now, I don't hear it anymore. But I know I didn't make it up because I played it for Leela and Rama's friend had come over that night for Rama's friend as well, and we had heard a yes. But I don't hear it anymore, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll sit and see if anyone else hears anything.
Yeah, that's all of that. I think all of that like color and flavor adding to the story is just like it sticks with you, right? Like I thought about it even after we ended the first part of the call. So for that reason, I would definitely rate it a scared shitless. Is that what the the top level is?
Yeah.
The highest You're giving it the highest rating?
This is the lens that I'm thinking of it through, right? I also have told you guys a story, right? And I know the detail and the amount of effort or like how I spun the story for you, and that was a middle rating. And these two stories are completely like night and day, I think. Like the amount of creepy factor, I think, is way more elevated than what I could paint in the picture. Having the video talking about your experience through it. So yeah, I would say high rating, highest rating.
Yay, great. Wow, thank you so much. This was fun.
You don't want my rating?
No, because we're telling it to one person. You already you experienced this with me.
Leela's like, I wasn't scared at all.
I think I'll be able to sleep tonight.
You were that night. I wasn't able to sleep that night.
I know. I was oblivious. Well, my rating doesn't matter. Sabea's does. And I already lived through it.
And when you first asked me, I was like, yeah, I'll go. It sounds like a fun experience. I doubt I'm going to feel anything. It's just going to be a fun story to tell. And then when you show me the video, I'm like, well, if I'm actually going to get creeped out and they're actually going to be ghosts and spirits and stuff like that, I don't know. But that probably adds to the...
Well, thank you very much, Samaya, for joining us for our terrifying true tale of the spiritual hauntings and goings on at the Morris Jumel Mansion.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach us at podcomplaywithus@gmail.com.
We'd love to hear from our listeners. So if you have real life ghost stories or paranormal encounters and you think it'll scare the shit out of us, please send them in. Until next time, goodbye.
Bye.